Welcome back to the Gailey Show. I am John Parker. We are coming up on the bottom of the hour. Dr. Samuel Clowes Huneke is an award-winning associate professor of history at George Mason University. A historian of modern Germany, he is the author of numerous books and articles, including States of Liberation, Gay Men Between Dictatorship and Democracy in Cold War Germany, and A Queer Theory of State. Sorry, my notes, I was like, and where's going there? You can buy his books and learn more about his research at his website, samuelcleweshuneke.com. Hey, Sam, it's good to see you again.
It's great to see you, as always.
All right, let's start with how Trump is going after the LGBTQ community, specifically the gays, especially those gays who want the LGB without the T. So I have a little list here, some of which I got from your excellent article, and others that I just, happen to know off the top of my head. So let's see here. Hundreds of millions of dollars of gay health research slashed. Books about gay people in the schools on military bases slashed. Books about gay people just generally in schools banned. A Christian nationalist movement that wants to eliminate gays. I would argue that we live in a functional Christian nationalist state, especially when I just saw a video over the weekend of Kristi Noem opening a cabinet meeting in prayer. Literally dozens of Trump supporting pastors calling for gay people to be killed. Check. The GOP actively trying to kick out their own candidate for lieutenant governor in Virginia who happens to be gay. Check. MAGA legislators and Supreme Court justices trying to get gay marriage overturned. Check. 86% of LGBTQ voters voting for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in 2024. However, check. And yet, Sam, the Trump administration will go down in history as the administration that had multiple firsts of highest ranking gays so far serving in a presidential administration. Please make it make sense.
Yeah, it's I mean, I guess first of all, it's nothing new, right? Like, what's new is that these people are out, but it's not new that there are gay people in a Republican administration. This has been a trope at least since Reagan, Reagan is sort of when I think the parties start diverging really on this issue. Before Reagan, I don't think there's a strong difference, but there you can probably find more tolerant people and more discriminatory people in both parties. But with Reagan and the AIDS crisis and so on, it really, I think, starts to diverge. And internationally, the 80s are when you start to see more of a consolidation of gay votes in Western Europe as well, going towards more center-left parties. So before that, it really was kind of scattershot. There wasn't really anything that we could refer to as a gay vote or a pink vote or a queer vote. One of my favorite statistics is, sorry, I'm just going all over the place here, from 1920s Germany, which, as we've talked about, had one of the first major sort of homosexual rights movements in modern history, also a trans rights movement as well. And one of the big organizations did a poll of their members in, I don't remember the exact year, but 1920s, early 1930s, before the Nazi dictatorship. And it found that about a third of its members were in favor of sort of right or far right parties, including the Nazi Party. So again, this is not really anything new. I think we think of it as particularly shocking, both for the reason, the list of reasons you just listed, but also we sort of have this idea that queer people tend to vote kind of center left or left, that by virtue of our sexual identity, we're sort of inherently going to be more progressive. So I think what's going on here is in part just something that's always been happening. The difference is that the gay rights movement has been wildly successful in this country. And so they are now comfortable coming out of the closet and being open about the fact that they are gay, even as they work in an administration that is very intently trying to essentially disassemble the gay rights that give them the ability to come out of the closet in the first place.
Okay, your article, which I want to be correct here. So it's in the Baffler, And the headline is "The Fruits of Rank." Subhead: Trump's A gays are nothing new. So y'all can just go to the Baffler. You'll find this article, "The Fruits
And
of
also,
Rank."
props to the editors there. The fruits of rank was a phrase I use. Like, I wrote it and put it in the article without even thinking of it as a double entendre. And then they made it the headline. I thought, oh my God, that's brilliant.
It's good. You have the start of a book if you want to. I think there. And the reason why I said that is you take us through. You were just starting to do it. You are taking us through the history of how this isn't new. And in my brain, I want to be like, okay, well, there's got to be self-interest. There's got to be a when you have a government using the police force to literally bang down the door of your bedroom door and arrest you for having sex and imprison you for it and then charge you and make you pay fines, like you have a certain level of self-interest to go, I'm going to vote for a party that's going to stop the police from coming into my bedroom. And yet there is this anomaly of, as you point out, there was, I mean, do we start with the most, is he the most infamous? I guess there's Roy Cohn and
Roy
Ernst
Cohn.
Röhm.
Yeah, I mean, Roy
I don't
Cohn
know,
is the obvious example.
but there's Ernst.
Yes, right, right. There's Ansbom. Right. I mean, so, I think there's a lot of countervailing incentives here. And that's sort of part of the problem. I mean, that's sort of the model of late 20th, early 21st century gay politics, is to say the most important thing about you is your sexual or gender identity, and you should be voting based on that. And I think a lot of people historically have rejected that. I mean, it's sort of anomalous historically speaking and kind of crazy. And this is actually a big topic that I, research in my first book in particular, is how are these movements so successful at getting gay, lesbian, trans, bisexual people to identify politically with their sexual desires, and we can, that might be a sort of side tangent, but so there's a lot going on here, and I think when we are talking about the 1920s, 1930s, that has definitely not been established. And there's a bunch of countervailing trends. And so someone like Ernst Röhm, who becomes the head of the Nazi stormtroopers, the SA, he's a very close friend of Adolf Hitler's. He is not what we'd call openly gay, but he is outed in the early 1930s by the Social Democratic Party. And he essentially says, like, no, I'm not going to buy into this kind of medicalized, effeminate version of homosexuality. I think that my, desire for and love of other men makes me more masculine. It's something that I found fulfilled in, the trenches of World War I, and I'm going to seek out experiences and groups that will replicate that. And so, actually, in a kind of hyper masculine, fascist, sort of setting, that is where he found that fulfilled.
I have to fit in a quick break here. We're going to have more with Dr. Samuel Huneke when we come back as we try to figure out why there are so many gays. And apparently, this is just a thing that's been happening in history. You're listening to The Gaily Show on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk, and AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Coming to you from the studios of AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota, and airing on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk. Welcome back to The Gaily Show. I am John Parker. It is 33 minutes after the hour. My executive producer, Jim Pounce, is out today. He performs in the Remember Project, which is a program that uses theater to educate about Alzheimer's and dementia. He is traveling to northern Minnesota for a performance, and next week he's actually going to be off again as he flies to Michigan for performances there. Quick programming note starting tomorrow, we are going to have candidates for Minneapolis mayor stopping by the Gaily Show to talk about LGBTQ issues. So our candidate tomorrow will be Jazz Hampton, who will be here in the 2 p.m. hour, specifically at 2:30 p.m. On Wednesday, we will have Reverend Dr. Dwayne Davis, and then we'll have more candidates in the weeks to come before the November election. And before we get back to our conversation with Dr. Huneke, I want to share about our travel partner, Travel Marquette. I am actually getting out of Dodge and going to see them. I'm going to the county and to see the city this weekend, and I literally can't wait because I need a break from all of the news. And the reason I've been going to Marquette for twice a year for the past 10 years. And I love that I don't have to worry about being queer while I'm visiting Marquette County. It is a university town, it is a super blue city, and a reliably blue county, has a very active pride organization. It does everything that I need besides, being able to just be myself. Good restaurants, excellent bookstores, relaxing hiking and time out in nature, and delicious bakeries. This weekend actually is the Fresh Coast Film Festival. So, those in Minnesota or in Wisconsin, if you want to drive up and see the film festival yourself, you can do that. If you're in Chicago and want to hop a plane, you can do that as well to Marquette. You can start your adventure at travelmarquette.com. That is travelmarquette.com. Samuel Clowes Huneke is an award-winning associate professor of history at George Mason University. He's a historian of modern Germany and the author of numerous books and articles, including States of Liberation, Gay Men Between Dictatorship and Democracy in Cold War Germany, and A Queer Theory of State. We've done episodes separately on both of those books. Highly encourage you to go to our YouTube channel to watch those interviews, or you can go to everywhere you get your podcasts and to listen to them as well. Sam, okay, fast forward from the
Yeah.
Nazis, where we have Ernst Röhm, who's basically in charge of the stormtroopers, and it doesn't go well for him, actually, right? That he
No.
like,
Yeah,
I
he
can't
he
remember,
gets
he's jailed or does he die?
he's killed. Yeah,
Okay,
he's murdered in essentially an internal party purge year and a half into the regime. The other thing I quickly wanted to mention is I think that there's a sort of respectability angle to it too, a kind of leopards eating people's faces party element, where there's usually gay men who sort of think, well, if I they're not going to come after people like me as long as I'm not a sex worker, I'm not poor, I'm not sort of flaunting it in their faces, etc. And so I think that it's both a kind of rejection of the way that gay identity is construed, as well as this sort of fear or anxiety that, oh, if I associate with these people, then they're going to come after me. But as long as I'm on the kind of right side of things, then I can sort of keep it under wraps and I'll be fine.
The subject that we're talking about is Sam's article in the Baffler, the fruits of rank, which is about how there are a lot of high-powered gays serving in high-powered positions within the cabinet of MAGA Trump, having first time having highest ranking gays in these positions. And Sam is trying to help me understand the how and the why of this. So this is clearly something that has been happening within far right and Nazi movements. I did not know about, so if we want to fast forward here to Reagan's presidency, the Fruit Loop and Carl Channel.
I'm not actually sure how you pronounce it, but yes.
Okay, so he's a key figure, as you write, in the Iran-Contra scandal, and apparently had this whole fundraising operation, which I'm assuming was for Reagan and the Republicans, called the Fruit Loop.
Yes, and they were involved in helping to finance the Iran-Contra
Oh, even
sort of
better.
arms, and that's why he went to jail for Iran-Contra. And just a sort of shout out, well, a couple shout outs. First of all, that article in the Baffler is responding to some really excellent reporting, both in the New York Times, as well as by the novelist Daniel Lefferts, who wrote a sort of large piece early in the year about the sort of MAGA gays. And then this little tidbit about Spitz channel, who was involved in Iran Contra, actually comes from James Kirchick's book Secret City about the gay history of Washington D.C. So just to sort of pull back the veil a little bit, that this isn't all me sort of scrounging around in the archives.
No,
But no, it's a totally crazy story, and actually, I think in Kirchick's book he does a good job of kind of showing just how many closeted gay Republicans there were in these administrations, despite the fact that Reagan obviously was deeply homophobic. The AIDS crisis happened on his watch. There was an intentionality to let gay people die of this disease that we know from looking at other countries that had much more proactive stances that many of those deaths were avoidable in our country.
and you're reminding me, actually, you said something earlier that, like, okay, John, chill. Up through Reagan and ostensibly Bush and maybe Clinton and infamously Barack Obama, who was like, I don't believe in gay marriage. Like, the Democrats were not the saviors of the LGBTQ community. Like, they think of themselves today Johnson, super homophobic, Carter, homophobic. Like these
Yeah.
administrations were just as, I mean, I don't say, well, yeah, in some instances they were just as bad.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, absolutely. And the Lavender Scare, for instance. I mean, um, which was the sort of purging of government officials, in particular from the State Department, who were queer. It sort of gets its start at the very end of the Truman administration. It really sort of picks up steam during the Eisenhower administration. But you have both Democrats and Republicans happily going along with it. It's in fact very much a reaction to the New Deal, and to this sort of perceived. I mean, what's interesting is that you have this kind of association of being left or far left and queer, but in a negative sense, right? So you don't have queer people who are voting left because they think it'll help them, but you have this association of, the sort of the commie queers who, are then during the Red Scare, sort of imputed to be what was going on in the New Deal under FDR. But that the Lavender Scare, for instance, this policy of making sexuality a sort of precursor to working in particular in national security is only officially repealed under Barack Obama. So, yes, you're completely correct. I do want to point out, though, I think starting with Clinton, though, you do have a contemporary perception of Democrats as being more gay friendly. So we, of course, don't look back at the Clinton eras and think, oh, how wonderful. However, it's worth remembering that at the time, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was meant to be a gay friendly policy, right?
Mm.
That is not how it turned out. But the idea that you would no longer simply dismiss people who are gay from the military, but rather if they could sort of keep it under wraps and they could stay, was in the early 90s, at least by certain quarters, seen as a progressive policy. So I think that's when you start having this association. And obviously, Barack Obama, for all his disavowal of gay marriage, was seen, I think, correctly, basically, as a very pro gay rights or queer rights president. And that obviously built on itself. You have Loretta Lynch, his second attorney general, making this sort of profound declaration in support of trans rights towards the end of his presidency. But again, I think it's worth pointing out just how contemporary that is. That isn't something that has existed for a long time. That's basically been within our lifetimes that this has happened.
I think I hear a squeaky chair back there too. It kind
Oh,
of
I'm
sounds
sorry.
like one of the. It sounds like a duck call or like a turkey caller.
No. Okay, I'll try not to move.
I was like, unless you got like a pet duck, and I don't know about that.
No, I'm just getting too excited, and so I'm bouncing around in my chair.
Oh, do you know how many times I've hit this microphone? Because I'm just wildly flailing my arms. Um, okay, so but there's I think that one of the arguments that folks are like, and in my brain as well, I look at you're talking there about how uh, President Obama campaigned on no to gay marriage, and then over the course of the 8 years in office, rapidly seemed to just started taking all of these pro LGBTQ positions. Vice President Biden just basically went on TV and told everybody, "Yeah, we're gay marriage friendly. Let's do it." And Obama was like, "Excuse me, what did you just say?" Uh, but why didn't we see a similar, because if there are all these high-ranking gays and
Mm-hmm.
pretty much gay men
Yeah.
in these right, conservative and far right, uh, why didn't that party develop anything positive? It just sort of seems like it's consistently always, bad, 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 tamp it down, get rid of it. And I think that is what creates this cognitive dissonance between, the two parties these days anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think my best explanation for that is the rise of the Christian right in this country. This is something that took shape over the second half of the 20th century and really entered mainstream politics through the kind of Reagan coalition. Um, I think again, I'm not an American historian, so that's my kind of caveat here. But my understanding is that this kind of Christian right or far right was seen as pretty fringe until Reagan pretty explicitly welcomed them into his camp. Um, and so I think that's when you have the kind of modern Republican coalition born, right? This sort of coalition of business and Christianity, or a certain flavor of Christianity. I should sort of caveat that by saying there are plenty of Christians who obviously don't vote for the Republican Party. And I think that that particular flavor of Christianity is very much against a whole host of, sexual rights and gender related rights. So they're obviously against abortion, and that's been one of the driving issues for the Republican Party and the right in this country since Roe v. Wade. They're against rights for gay people. In many cases, they're against other rights for women in particular. Right? There's this sort of very quote unquote traditional view of gender roles. They sort of turn themselves into being transphobic. And so I think that's really the reason. I think that's also the reason why such a high percentage of queer people vote for the Democratic Party in this country, is because there is a genuine fear about what will happen if Republicans are in power. And what's interesting is when you compare it to other sort of similar countries in Western Europe, you don't have the same Christian right, and you don't have the sort of center right or right wing party being nearly as sort of vocally homophobic. And therefore, queer people actually do tend to split their votes much more among the kind of big mainstream parties. There's maybe a slight preponderance for kind of center left parties still, but it's not nearly as pronounced as in the US.
You start to make an argument in your article. We're talking with Dr. Samuel Clowes Huneke about gays in MAGA land, and you start making an argument about how the stability of identifying as gay, lesbian, bi, etc., is kind of breaking down, and that's maybe leading to this exodus of or return of LGBTQ people to these other right wing and far right parties. And of course, I'm asking a huge question right when we're coming up on a break here. But it real quickly, with a minute to go, because you also quote Roy Cohn actually from Angels in America, where it's almost a sense of like they don't identify as being gay, which sort of helps them be in that space.
Right. And it was an article. It's not a fully fleshed out idea, but basically, I think there's been a sort of switcheroo where it used to be that if you're sort of a conservative, closeted gay man, you're going to, publicly identify as straight. You're going to kind of keep it under wraps. You're a straight man who, plays around with other men, whatever. And now, I think the sort of conservative thing to do is to sort of identify as gay, not queer, right? And that if you identify as queer, then you're signaling that you're, part of the radical left or what have you. And so I think there's been this sort of embrace of kind of sexual identity as the left is kind of leaving sexual identity behind.
I want to pick that up too when we come back. I have to fit in a quick break. One last break, still lots to get to with Dr. Samuel Clowes Huneke. When we come back, you are listening to The Gailey Show on AM 950 and WCPT 820. Welcome back to The Gailey Show. We are coming up on the top of the hour. I'm John Parker. We are here with Dr. Samuel Clowes Huneke. We're talking about his recent article, The Fruits of Rank, which is in the Baffler. And we're talking about all of the gays in the Trump administration, how we get there and how they got there, and all of the sort of politics behind that and the history behind that. And you said something that made my heart skip, not in a good way, before the break, around the left leaving sexual identity. And the reason why my heart kind of freaked out there was what Gavin Newsom is doing in California right now, where he is telling Democrats that you have to make a choice, essentially. You either fight fascism and fight Trump, or you have gay rights, queer rights, and you can't have both, as evidenced by his sending his staff to the Hill, their version of it in California, and saying, don't send me any more LGBTQ legislation, and zeroing out LGBTQ issues from his budget. And he's still got a bunch of bills on LGBTQ rights that he hasn't signed yet, despite signing hundreds of other bills already in the past week. So, not to mention his podcasts and all this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Gavin Newsom is an idiot, so that
seems like everyone who's from California or actually knows anything about him feels that way, and people who aren't from California and don't know anything about him are all like, he's the savior.
Oh no, I'm very bad at political prognostication, so take this with a grain of salt. But I am pretty convinced he will never be president. I just don't think he doesn't stand for anything. He doesn't believe in anything, right? This is someone who first made a name for himself by illegally granting gay marriages, and I think that tells you pretty much everything you need to know that he has now done like a not full 180, but is like in the process of doing a 180 on that. And so that's not what I meant. I didn't mean that the left is turning its back on sexual identity in the sense that they're going to become homophobic. I hope they're not going to become homophobic. There are plenty of leftist movements in the past that happen. My point was, I actually think, and there's a sort of silver lining to this, which is that I think if you look at the history of this effort to get queer people to vote for left or center left parties, this was an incredibly freighted and sort of ambivalent process. It definitely relied on respectability politics, right? We're going to, in particular, get rid of like sex workers. We're going to privilege wealthy gay people, right? If you think about people like Edith Windsor, are the face of this movement. And nothing against Edith Windsor, but I think it is telling that the case that sort of opened the floodgates to gay marriage was about inheritance tax and about the right of a wealthy widow to inherit massive sums of money from her deceased partner, right? These are not the sort of concerns of ordinary Americans. The inheritance tax only applies to like point something percent of the entire US population. So my point is that I think if the left gets back to thinking about, material goods and sort of class and how people are actually living and how to materially improve people's lives, that is actually a better basis upon which to build a coalition than sort of going around and assigning people different identities and saying, we're going to give you these rights based on this identity, and we're going to give you other people these rights based on that identity. And I think there's a way to talk about this and do it and think about it that is actually much more holistic, and much less kind of scattershot and much less, kind of finger to the wind, which is what Gavin Newsom is doing, saying, "Oh well, this issue this bucket of rights is no longer popular, so we're gonna drop them." Whereas I think if we're thinking about how do we sort of improve everyone's life, that's a much more compelling message and much better overall. And I think it's also telling, as I mentioned, Clinton is really the start of this in the US, where you have this sort of alliance between the Democratic Party and queer people. That is also the administration where the Democratic Party takes a hard rightward turn to kind of neoliberal politics. And this is an argument that many, many, many scholars have made for decades now. Lisa Dugan is a great place to start, her essay on homonormativity, and essentially saying that this was cover for this kind of rightward economic turn. And so the Democratic Party could say, no, no, we're progressive, we support rights, and holding up these kind of identity politics rights, while at the same time being complicit in shredding the social safety net, shredding regulations for big industry. I mean, 2008, the financial crash is just as much Clinton's fault as it was Bush's. And so I think that if we're starting to let go of that a little bit more, it might actually mean something good about where the left is going in this country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're not convinced.
Well, no, it's resonating with me, and this is my people call it my angry face, and I'm like, no, it's my thinking face, which is I have talked to, unfortunately, too many queer people who immediately were like, yeah, we voted for Kamala. Boom, the end. Obviously I vote for Democrats. Like it's sort of a given. I'm gay, I'm queer, I'm lesbian, I vote for the left. But then you start talking about immigration, and it's like, oh my God, you sound like MAGA right now. And you're like, oh no, 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 no. And there's other issues where they start talking, and I'm like, no, 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 no. You sound exactly like any of these, MAGA podcasters right now. And I think that this is a conversation that we're gonna have to continue as I'm looking at my clock.
Yes.
But I think you're right. And I'm also thinking about how do we even approach our show and doing this, where we are starting to butt up around immigration issues. And I'm like, the queers don't really have an immigration policy. We like asylum when it's a gay person. When it was Andrea Hernandez Romero who was sent to a concentration camp, suddenly as queer people, we cared about it. But it seems like when there isn't someone involved, then we're sort of ambivalent. We're like, well, we don't really have an immigration policy, so to speak. And so I think that you're right there in terms of how is this located not within identity politics anymore of here are our list of priorities, but then we're sort of free to go off and have MAGA economic policies or MAGA uh, immigration policies that are harming us. But anyway, that is a much larger conversation, and
That
we will have
is
you
a
back
much
here.
larger conversation.
We'll have you back here in a month where we can pick it up there. His website is samuelcleweshuneke.com. His books are States of Liberation, Gay Men Between Dictatorship and Democracy in Cold War Germany, and A Queer Theory of the State. You can buy them at his website or on our bookshop.org page. Links in the show notes and our bio. See you next month, Sam.
See you next month.
All right. Thank you for listening, everyone. Up next on WCPT 820 is Choose Views with Richard Chu. On AM 950, it's the Matt McNeil Show. Stay tuned after that for Native Roots Radio. And then at 10 p.m. Central, Step Into the Unknown with Greg Bakken on Ghost Box Radio. And until tomorrow, keep it queer, America.